I, Samantha Britt, take Nicholson Adamson as my beloved husband, and I vow to stand by his side till death do us part. I watched as my best friend took her vows with the guy who used to be my husband, which was quite painful if I'm being honest. As I kept my hatred for my best friend inside to marry my ex, I gave them a fake smile while dressing as one of the bridesmaids. You guys must be thinking about what's going on over here, so let me just give you a quick glimpse on my past. I married Nicholson 5 years ago after 3 years of dating, but we couldn't keep our marriage together even for the duration of our dating life and ended up getting divorced 2 months before our 3rd anniversary. We moved on with our lives, but I was still unable to let go of the love and memories I had with him. I heard his name again 6 months ago when my best friend returned from Paris from her vacation. She told me that they met there and ended up having the greatest time of their lives. Even then, I couldn't help but feel anger and jealousy deep inside. But I decided to not show that in front of Samantha, which she took the wrong way and started dating him. She thought I was completely moved on with my life and had completely forgotten about him. I let it be thinking it might be another way of Sammy's flings and it won't last much longer. But I was wrong. 2 months later, here she was having a sleepover at my place, telling me how he popped the question and asked her to marry him. Seriously, 2 months? They couldn't even wait 2 years, so that I may get used to maybe seeing them together. But since I didn't want to lose my best friend over a man, I stayed silent. She crossed the limit when she asked me to be her bridesmaid, knowing I may have felt, but I kept my silence again. But now, I'm watching this happen in front of my eyes, the two of them getting married. I couldn't watch any longer, so without turning back or listening to anyone, I rushed out. I removed the heels that were killing my feet, and tears started to stream through my eyes, which I did not care to wipe away as I kept walking in the middle of the road. It was nighttime, so not many people or vehicles were around. That was when a black van stopped in front of me, and 2 men in masks pulled me inside. They put a wet cloth over my nose with a strong smell, which made my vision start getting blurry. And within minutes, everything went dark, and I passed out. The next thing I knew was that I woke up in the middle of nowhere, a place surrounded by trees. I tried to get a hold of the surroundings despite my foggy mind, and I figured I was in the woods. There was the same black van parked at a distance, and the 2 men were standing near it talking about something, while my hands and legs were tied. Damn it. My day could not get any worse than this. First, my ex married my best friend, and now I could not even indulge in self-pity anymore because I had gotten myself kidnapped. As my brain was getting clearer, I started to try and figure out a way to escape from the situation I was in. I tried to crawl away like a snake, but the pebbles and branches were making it difficult as they hurt me as I moved around. On top of that, the 2 men turned their head toward me when they heard the rustling sound and my crawling between leaves. My mind was blank. Not even a single idea was passing my brain. It wasn't like I wasn't terrified in this situation because, trust me, I was beyond terrified thinking what might happen next to me. But I was the kind of girl who would try to make best to find a way before giving up. At the same time, I saw the pointy bark of the tree beside me, so I moved closer very slowly and quietly and started to rub the rope over it, hoping it might get after an hour or 2. That was when I heard a very familiar voice. "This will never work, Sasha, so stop trying." I raised my head in shock, and it was him. "Nicholson, what are you... No, why did you kidnap me? Didn't you just marry Sammy?" I was completely freaked out and confused seeing him here, but instead of replying to any of my questions or even saying a word, he silently smiled and squatted down next to me. He stroked my hair lightly with his hand and then moved it to my cheeks, caressing them. After about 10 minutes of his silence, as I stared at him with my eyes torn open unbelievably, he finally spoke. "I never should have divorced you. I missed you so much that I had to resort to such means to meet you again. Do you even know how heartbroken I felt when you wouldn't see me even for once? Why did you kidnap me, Nicholson?" I put force on every word as I asked, gritting my teeth. He took a deep sigh and said, "It was so that you wouldn't resist meeting or talking to me. You know I still love you with all my heart. I never meant to divorce you, truly. I only did it to punish you a little, and I was planning to get back together, but you completely shut me out." I looked at him dumbfounded as he blabbered all this, unable to believe my ears. Whatever he was saying sounded utterly rubbish to me. It felt like he had lost his mind completely. "But we're divorced, and you're married to my best friend now, so please let me go, Nicholson," I said in a slow, calm voice so that he would reflect on what he did. "No, I only married Samantha to be with you again. I know how much she means to you, and that's why I knew you wouldn't miss her wedding no matter what. And you know what? When I saw you walk out of the wedding, I knew you still had feelings for me." "You're wrong. It wasn't the reason I walked out. Sammy's like a sister to me. We've always been together ever since we were children. That's why it was hard for me to see her betray me, even after knowing how much pain and suffering you would put me through." The way he was looking at me while I said all this, I knew he didn't believe me. "I'm not letting you go, honey. I know you still love me. So now, the two of us will be together forever." He said while laughing like a maniac, which scared me to the point that the pain while crawling back wasn't unbearable anymore. "Please don't do this. Police are going to find out and you'll get in trouble." I could feel my voice trembling as I said this. He laughed and moved closer, grabbing my face in one of his hands. He forcefully kissed me. Then he leaned toward my left ear. "Trust me, no one will ever find out. For them, I'm spending my first night with my newly wedded wife." He injected something in my hand as he said this. I looked into his eyes in confusion as my vision started to get blurry. I saw him getting up and mouthing the words, "I love you." Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Have you heard of the saying, "All is fair in love and war"? But what if everything is not fair? What if the limits were crossed to win love and war? Would you say then too that all is fair? I don't think so. The story I am about to tell you is about a story that I covered in my early times as a reporter. It's about someone who did every possible thing to win both love and the war. It was about 7 years ago. I had just joined this news channel a few days ago as an investigative journalist, and as my training was completed, I was assigned my first story to cover. It was about a love affair of a famous businessman whose mistress, Catherine, had committed suicide. So my story had to revolve around the truth about what happened in that case. My boss helped me get into the office where Catherine used to work as an undercover employee, and that was where I met this guy named Bob, who looked like a total wreck after Catherine's death. I got to know through the other employees that Bob and Catherine were dating for the past 5 years, and he was good to her during the time they were dating. But this information led to the question that if he was so good to her, then why was she having an affair that led her to commit suicide? People were sympathetic toward Bob, but no one suspected him even once of killing Catherine. I mean, come on people, she cheated on him. How is it that no one suspected him? Well, doesn't matter, because he was on the top of my suspect list, so I started watching him. One day out of the blue, Bob asked me if I wanted to have a coffee with him. I was kind of confused by his sudden approach, but still, I agreed. and followed him to the cafe outside the company during lunchtime. Since it was a perfect opportunity for me to get the information from him that I needed, I wore a wire. "Why are you so interested in Catherine's affair?" he asked the moment we sat down at the table. "Excuse me?" I asked with a confused expression on my face. "Oh, don't play coy with me. I've heard you going around asking about Catherine's affair with the chairman. It was bad enough that she had to suffer with such rumors when she was alive, and now you're bringing it up again after her death too?" he said in an angry, low tone, which sounded like a warning. "What do you mean it was a rumor?" I asked. "Well, of course it was a rumor. She got promoted as chairman's secretary, so people started saying she seduced him to get that position, but I never once doubted her." He stopped speaking when the waiter came with the coffee, and I waited for him to leave because I had questions for him. "Is that why she committed suicide?" I asked the moment the waiter left. "No. What makes you think she committed suicide?" "She was murdered." He looked me in the eyes and said in a calm tone, "Murdered?" I was dumbfounded by what he had just told me. "Enough about that. Now tell me, why are you running around your mouth and asking questions about her?" He leaned back and asked in the same calm voice he had since we arrived at the cafe. For some reason, it was terrifying the hell out of me. Luckily, I had a solid story prepared as an excuse if someone were to get suspicious of me, so I used it. I told him that the two of us used to be best friends back in Dunfermline, where she used to live during the time of her high school, and when I found out about her suicide, I wanted to know the truth about what happened. It seemed like he believed me, and then we got back to the office. I couldn't shake it off my mind, the way he told me about her girlfriend's murder calmly. And what surprised me even more was that he hadn't reported it to the police yet. After that little conversation of ours, he went back to being hostile toward me, the way he had been since my first day in this office. Anyway, it was the day I was working overtime, and no one was around at that hour, when I heard someone's voice coming from the chairman's office. It was hard to figure out who it was and what they were talking about, so I went a little closer to eavesdrop. "Watch your mouth, brother, or else I might slip out about us sharing the same DNA to the media. It's not the only secret that I know about you." It was Dan's voice that I recognized in an instant. "What do you want, Daniel? Why are you doing this?" The chairman's voice sounded tired, as if he was on the effect of some sort of drug. "What else do you think? I want to win back what was supposed to be mine, so just sign these papers and your secret will be safe with me." Dan's tone was the same terrifyingly calm as before. "Why are you doing this, Dan? First you killed Catherine just because she dumped you, and now you're doing this." "I killed her? No, you can't put this on me, Nathan. I loved her. She was only dumping me because you brainwashed her against me, so her blood is on your hands. I was never going to let you have her through deceptions. That's why I killed her. Now sign this quietly." I couldn't believe what I had just heard. I wasn't able to record the entire conversation, but I managed to record Dan's confession about murdering Catherine. After a few more minutes of listening to their conversation, I left because my cell phone started vibrating and I couldn't risk getting found out. As soon as I left the office building, I gave a call back to the director and told him that I was finished with the story I needed. The next day, the story about Dan being the murderer, along with him being the chairman's brother, was shown live on our news channel. But it was soon followed by the news of another suicide that was of none other than Dan himself. I did not get his story this time, but I received a thank you letter from the chairman's wife, which said, "Thank you for your support and for helping my husband win this." I checked the envelope, and it had a check for $1 million in it. I smiled, thinking about how I edited out the part of the recording about Chairman Nathan's wife's involvement in Catherine's murder. She was the assistant director of the company, and when I was leaving the building that night, she caught me. Dan did not act on his own. Carla was the one who manipulated him into thinking that it would be better to kill her instead of letting Nathan have her. She made a pretty good deal with me, She told me if I would be able to dump it all on Dan, that she would give me enough money that would satisfy me. Well, it was my first job, and I needed the money, so I accepted her offer. I won't say I don't regret it. I do, sometimes, but not that much. It's because I know that she did it for love, and she would have gotten out of this by using her money anyway. So why would I feel guilty about something that has nothing to do with me? She won the war her husband was having with his brother. So as a result, she won her love back as well, and I got the money I needed. I would not call this fair. Instead, an unfair win-win situation.
In the year 2001, movie theaters across the country were terrified by the demonic evil of the antagonists in Jeepers Creepers. The movie is the story of a brother-sister duo whose road trip is turned into a living nightmare by an immortal creature who hungers for their body parts. It's certainly a fantastical tale, but you may be surprised to learn that one of the movie's most terrifying scenes is actually very much based on reality. More than a decade prior to the release of the film, a woman named Marilyn DePue was reported missing on Easter Sunday of 1990. Marilyn's neighbors strongly suspected that her husband Dennis was responsible for the disappearance, as it was common knowledge around the neighborhood that the DePues had something of a rocky marriage. Many gossiped that Dennis had violently snapped when Marilyn finally professed a desire to end what had been a miserable marriage. The reality wasn't far off. After severely beating her in front of their 3 children, Dennis DePue lied to them, telling them that he was going to take their mother to the hospital. Instead, Dennis drove the dazed and bloodied Marilyn out into the woods and shot her in the back of the head. Since he was on some pretty isolated Michigan back roads while he was dumping his wife's body, Dennis DePue assumed that he would be undisturbed. It was rare to find any vehicle at all driving down that stretch of road, but as fortune would have it, a married couple by the name of Ray and Marie Thornton were headed Dennis's way. They slowed as they saw an abandoned schoolhouse at the roadside, just in time to catch a glimpse of Dennis DePue, holding a horribly familiar shape wrapped in a bloody off-white sheet. Horrified by what they'd seen, the couple raced down the dirt road only to find that a man who had evidently killed once before was now pursuing them at breakneck speed. The ensuing car chase between Dennis and the Thornton couple will seem eerily familiar to anyone who has watched Jeepers Creepers, since this confrontation is essentially reenacted during the first portion of the movie. Even the build-up to the horrifying discovery is almost identical, as, much like the movie's protagonists, the Thorntons also happen to be playing the license plate game. Although director Victor Salva never cited the DePue murder as inspiration, it's rather hard to imagine that he wasn't influenced by it in some way. After failing to catch up with the Thorntons, Dennis Pugh then hid the truck he'd used to chase them, and for a good long while, there was no concrete leads on who killed the woman whose body was found behind that old abandoned church. Then one night, many months later, Dennis sat down to watch an episode of Unsolved Mysteries to find that the focus of that night's feature sounded strangely familiar. The show's narrator detailed a murder that had taken place in rural Michigan, and it also featured the testimony of a young married couple who had been chased down a stretch of highway after having witnessed the disposal of a corpse. The realization hit Dennis like a ton of bricks. They were talking about him and his wife, and by that point he was officially the case's primary suspect. He panicked, jumped into his new truck, and fled to the safety of a hideout in Texas, where he lived for 11 months under an assumed name. But after Hank Queen was discovered to be none other than Dennis DePue, and members of the public contacted law enforcement, it was Dennis's turn to be chased down a lonely stretch of highway, but this time, it was the police that were in hot pursuit. The lengthy chase ended in the state of Mississippi, where Dennis got out of his vehicle, put a pistol to his temple, and pulled the trigger. The footage from the episode of Unsolved Mysteries, the one that sent Dennis into a blind panic, can be found online, and it's fascinating to notice the obvious similarities between the movie and the real-world events. Yet something about the inclusion of an ancient demonic evil seems to take the sting out of the depicted events. We can watch a movie like Jeepers Creepers, then sleep soundly in our beds, safe in the apparent knowledge that it was only a movie. But the fact is, it isn't just a movie. For a good chunk of the film, the events are an exact recreation of a real-life event that almost ended in the brutal murders of a young Michigan couple by an unrepentant, bloodthirsty monster. A man who poses a much more tangible threat than any make-believe movie monster. No movie will ever compare to the hell that I've gone through the last year. The ordeal seems like it's been one long waking nightmare. It all began normally enough. I just recently got out of a long-term relationship and wasn't looking for anything serious. I figured that I'd give Tinder a shot. It didn't take long for me to get a few matches. I chose the hottest one and we agreed to meet a week later. The date went so well that we decided to do it again, and this became a regular thing until the fourth date. It was beginning to look as if it may grow into something more in spite of my original intentions. As the fourth date wrapped up, I invited her back to my place for a drink. She agreed, and things soon got hot and heavy, as they say. We were mere seconds away from taking things all the way when she broke down. I was confused. I'm not an aggressive partner, and her behavior up to that point had been very receptive. I asked what was wrong, and she said that she had been assaulted by a previous boyfriend. It had been several years, and she thought that she had moved past it. I felt bad for her, yet still kind of frustrated, and she got up and dressed quickly. I'll admit it was, like I said, frustrating, but there was little I could do, and I understood where she was coming from. I called her an Uber, and she left me with a difficult decision to make. After a long, sleepless night, I decided to just kind of end things there. Some of you reading this may call me cruel, but I couldn't really see another option. Things appeared to just be at an impasse, you know? I wasn't going to wait around until she determined that she was ready, and I sure wasn't going to pressure her into anything, obviously. I told myself that it was for the best. I'd never wanted to jump right into another relationship so quickly. That wouldn't benefit either of us, and I broke things off as kindly as I could. That night never came up. I stressed how I'd felt I'd rushed into things too quickly, and naturally she was a bit upset, but gave no indication of actually being angry. I wished her a happy future and just bid her a goodbye. And normally, that's where it would have ended. I took a month off from dating and Tinder and all that, and when I came back, I matched with a beautiful graduate student just looking to have a good time. This was more of what I was looking for. We met for drinks and hit it off. I went home happy with a spring in my step and a gleam in my eye, as they say. And maybe 2 days passed when I got a call from a neighbor. He informed me that there were leaflets posted all around our neighborhood, calling me an attempted predator. I thought this was his idea of some sick joke, and definitely not a good one. I laughed, but he assured me that this wasn't a laughing matter. I demanded proof, and a few minutes later he came to my door with a bright yellow piece of paper, and it claimed the following. On the night of Friday, November 19th, 2021, I was invited on a dinner date with Mr. My Name. After being plied with many glasses of wine, I was pressured into joining him at his home. Although I was clearly unable to consent, Mr. My Name attempted to coax me into his bed. When I refused his advances, he became enraged and threw me onto the street in the middle of the night. Please make sure all your female friends are made aware of the danger they may face by dating this manipulative monster. I can't begin to describe the anger that I felt in that moment. It was made worse when the neighbor asked me if it was true. Of course it wasn't, but when someone asks that type of question, it's a good indication that they believe it. Rather than strangle him, I did my best to assure him it was not. And his reception was less than convincing, but I had more pressing problems at that second. I had to get all those flyers, or whatever you call them, before any more impressionable idiots saw them. I spent most of the day pulling them from light poles and bulletin boards all over town. I'm still not sure if I got them all, and I counted over 200 when all was said and done. Then, out of nowhere, I discovered that I had been banned from Tinder after someone filed a complaint against me. My life felt like it was spiraling out of control, and I was desperate to stop it any way I could. What came next was probably the biggest mistake I'd made during this entire ordeal. I worked myself into such a muddle I did the one thing I shouldn't have. I contacted her via text message to confront her. She promised to retract her claims if I agreed to meet her face to face, and I took the bait like a sucker and drove to her house. We sat down at her kitchen table where she explained how hurt she felt. I wasn't interested in hearing any of it, but I was willing to suffer to save my good name. While she did so, she kept a glass of wine close at hand. She had clearly been drinking even before I arrived. After an hour, everything appeared to be handled. As I prepared to leave, she began coming on to me, and I mean in a very obvious manner, and I almost gave in, but then I remembered our previous problem and I shut her down. She was not pleased. She hissed and walked off toward the kitchen. I figured that she was getting some more wine, and it seemed like a great time to sneak away. I was putting on my jacket when a crash came from the kitchen. I hurried in to see what the matter was and was met by a shrill screeching. She rushed towards me with the stem of a broken wine glass and stabbed me with it. She retracted the jagged stem from the wound and snarled like some freaking animal. I was in shock, and I froze for a brief moment, unsure of how to react. Then she lunged at me again, just missing, and I took off. She pursued me out to my car and pounded on it as I sped off, and I just drove straight to the hospital, calling 911 as I drove. I informed the dispatcher which hospital I could be found at if the police needed to speak to me, and sure enough, an officer arrived as I was being treated for my injury. Luckily for me, she hadn't hit any major arteries or organs or anything like that, and the cop let me know that my assailant had been arrested, but what came next was a complete surprise. I was shocked to learn that she had a previous conviction for stalking and assault, and I surmised that it was a similar situation. Monday came around, and despite what I had hoped, my attacker was given bail. She paid and was out in time for dinner. I was furious and gave the assistant DA a piece of my mind, and while I waited for the trial day to arrive, I remained in a constant state of fear. I could swear that I saw her once or twice over that period, but I was in such a frazzled state that it was possibly my imagination. She became all I thought about. My work suffered. Even in my dreams, she often took center stage. She refused several plea deals and insisted the jury would acquit her. I know it was all a stall tactic, and she was assembling all the elements that she would need to what I thought would be to disappear. And the first rumblings began during jury selection. She had not been present for the procedure. Although she wasn't required to be, it didn't bode well. Then when the trial began in earnest, her lawyer was finally forced to admit that he had lost contact with his client several weeks prior. Now today is October 28th as I write this, and she's been missing almost 2 months. I sit around wondering what my future may hold. Hopefully she's done the wise thing and is currently laying low halfway around the world, or something. On the surface, that appears to be the case. Yet for some reason, I'm not totally convinced. My former love interest is a highly successful and intelligent woman. It's largely what drew her to me from the beginning. I have a creeping suspicion that she may be focusing her vast resources into getting back at me. Whatever form that may take, I'm not really sure. Naturally, I fear she'll go to the conventional route and just end my life, likely by her own hand, maybe another stabbing. However, she is more than capable to go even further and extend my suffering indefinitely. And this is why I'm going to all the trouble to post my side of the story. I'm well aware I probably come off as a jerk in some circumstances, but I don't care. I just want a record of the truth to be available publicly should I disappear. My lawyer also has a copy in case I'm no longer around to testify on my own behalf. It's doubtless that law enforcement will eventually catch up with her at some point. I'm concerned it will be too late for me, though. So if you learn of the death or a disappearance of some unknown New York State attorney through the media, Please remember what you read here.